From the studios of Staten Island Community Television, you're watching In the Bleachers, the TV show for the world's most passionate sports fans. Excuse me, everyone. Hello and welcome. I'm Jaime Hixson. Usually you see me here with my guest co-host, Hector Boza. Unfortunately, due to lingering health issues, Hector could not make it to the show today. But at least he is with us in spirit. Hopefully he'll try to make it for the next show, which is a week from tonight. In the meantime, I'm going to be taking you solo for the rest of the time. Now, if you want to see some past shows of ours, then you can check them out on our Facebook and YouTube pages. There's a Facebook page strictly for the show, In the Bleachers, and you can also look at it through YouTube and Twitter through my first and last name, Jaime Hixson. And you can also check us out on Instagram and Snapchat. And if you have a story that you would like to have told about anything in the world of sports, then we would love to know about it. So definitely check us out on either of those avenues. Well, the baseball winter meetings got started over the weekend, and after a rather quiet weekend, we just found out that there's been a signing taking place. Not anything of significance. It's Billy Hamilton signing with the Royals for a year and just over $5 million. But I expect for things to pick up really quickly in the next 2 or 3 days or so. I already saw that the Yankees are desperately trying to trade Sonny Gray so they could basically not just create some money maneuverability, but they really do want to get another starting pitcher in the fold in time for spring training. Word had it that the Yankees had gotten interest from the Reds and the Padres and the Brewers in a Sonny Gray deal. The Reds actually negotiated with the Yankees a little bit, but the Yankees wanted the Reds' best outfield prospect, which is Taylor Trammell, and the Reds said no. So, excuse me, that deal wound up falling by the wayside. First things first, though, the Yankees want to trade Sonny Gray. Second thing is they want to be able to get at least another starting pitcher or two and do something about that back end of the bullpen. So, what they're going to do in the next 2 or 3 days, we're not really sure. Usually, the winter meetings are where the most activity occurs, and then after that, some other deals take place. It's a far cry from what happened last year when a bunch of stars waited until deep into spring training, even into the regular season, to try and sign a deal. You wonder if this is smacking of any kind of collusion at all, because these guys were really holding out for a big chunk of money. Yet the owners would not bow down to any of their demands. So let's see what happens in this year's winter meetings. Speaking of which, this is the 10-year anniversary, excuse me, of that famous 12-player trade that took place between the Mets and the Mariners and the Cleveland Indians. The only thing that the Mets got out of the deal was J.J. Putz, a good closer in his days with the Mariners. But when he made his way to the Mets, he got hurt, and he was a complete and utter disaster on the mound when he was healthy. The Mariners, when you think about it, even though they wound up getting 7 players in return, you wonder if there was anybody that wound up getting anything in this deal. The Mariners got the most quantity, but who really got the most quality out of that deal? I'm not really sure. The one thing that I do know is that the Mets had a reliever, Joe Smith, a submarining right-hander, who wound up having a pretty decent 5 seasons pitching for the Indians. So 10 years later, I think Smith is still toiling around the majors right now. So let's see what happens in this year's winter meetings that could probably make some real noise. Of course, Bryce Harper and Manny Machado are still out there available for somebody. And it doesn't look like he's going to be returning to the Washington Nationals either, because the Nationals general manager said he doesn't expect Harper to return at all for next season. As far as Manny Machado is concerned, let's see if someone will overlook his admitted lack of hustle on the field and give him a more than fair offer. Now, as far as what the Mets are going to do, Brodie Van Wagenen has made it loud and clear he is trying to win now with the Mets. He's already made the Robinson Cano deal. Now, let's see what he can do for an encore. Can he get himself some quality starting pitching? Can he get himself some really good back end of the bullpen guys that can help support Edwin Nunez and Robert Gesellman and Seth Lugo? There's also the matter of getting catching. The Mets need a catcher. Yasmani Grandal of the Dodgers is still available. I'm also hearing maybe JT Realmuto is going to get traded by the Marlins. Let's see exactly what happens with those guys. As far as outfield help, maybe the Mets could use a right fielder, because right now it's Michael Conforto and Brandon Nimmo that have occupied the left and center spots in that outfield. There's also the matter of first base. Who's going to be the first baseman for the Mets? Is it going to be Peter Alonso, their top prospect, or is it going to be somebody else? It's just a matter of time before those questions get answered. Now, let's quickly turn to football a little bit. Did anyone see the end of that Patriots-Dolphins game that took place in South Florida yesterday? The one thing that I heard and that I saw about this ending was the fact that Rob Gronkowski, for some reason, was sent in to play defense for the Patriots. I'm not sure if this has happened before, where he was sent in to maybe defend a Hail Mary play near the end of a game, but this has to be probably the most fateful play that could have happened to the Patriots this season. The only thing that we know of is the Dolphins saved their season with that one play yesterday. Kudos to the Patriots, kudos to the Dolphins, I should say, for coming up with this victory. And did you know that Tom Brady now has 7 wins and 10 losses lifetime in Miami? The Dolphins give him a lot of trouble. In fact, they're probably the only team in the division that's given Tom Brady a lot of trouble over the years. Now, as far as what else happened around the leagues, in our neck of the woods, kudos to the Giants for not giving up entirely the second half of the year. They've now won 4 of their last 5 games, including a complete beatdown of the Redskins yesterday. And leave it to Mark Sanchez, who was signed off the scrap heap just a couple weeks ago, to come up with another way to butcher a ball game for his team. Not only did he get picked off 3 times, one of them was a pick 6. And it also just goes to show you that the Giants' future may be much better post-Eli Manning than people give them credit before, because Saquon Barkley just torched the Skins' defense yesterday for 120-plus yards and about 150-plus yards from scrimmage. The moves that the kid wound up putting on the field yesterday were just unreal. And the speed that he has, the Giants really lucked out when Barkley was made available at number 2 yesterday. So it's gotten to the point where now the Giants really do have something to play for the rest of the way, and that's trying to break even to end the season. It's going to be tough, though, because they got a couple of really good non-conference foes that they're going to be going up against. They have to play Tennessee, and they also have to play Indianapolis to help wrap up the year. And then there's the showdown with the Cowboys at Giants Stadium. So, can the Giants try and pull off a 500 record after a dreadful start of 1-7? Possibly, but we're going to have to wait and see. Yesterday, give the Giants credit for really taking advantage of the weaknesses that the Redskins have offensively and really exposing them. Because now that Colt McCoy and Alex Smith are both out for the rest of the season with broken legs, the Redskins are going to have to try and get by for the last 3 weeks with Mark Sanchez as their quarterback. And I have to admit, yesterday was a little worrisome for me because the Redskins still have Adrian Peterson to pound the ball to. Yet somehow the Giants did a phenomenal job of containing Adrian Peterson in this game. So now that the Giants are 5-8, they can look ahead to the Tennessee game next weekend to try and right the ship for the last 3 weeks. As for the Jets, well, let's put it this way. The Jets at least were able to save some kind of face by winning yesterday up in Buffalo to snap their 6-game losing streak. And Sam Darnold finally was able to come off the injured list and make his way onto the field. The more I see this kid play, the more I think to myself, this kid really has a bright future for the Jets, because even though he has committed a lot of turnovers this season when he did play, there's still the matter of the other things that he can bring to the table, like his athletic ability. I mean, you saw what he did when he avoided the rush, and wound up getting himself a really good score late in yesterday's game, which gave the Jets the lead. And now, with the Jets having games against the Houston Texans and also Green Bay and New England to look forward to, maybe the Jets can right the ship and end their season on a winning note. Who knows? And, of course, the Jets were able to force a bunch of turnovers against Josh Allen, who's the Bills' rookie quarterback from yesterday. So leave it to the Jets to actually do a decent job defensively and limit Josh Allen on the field. As far as other games in the NFL, what about how Patrick Mahomes was able to will his team to victory and send it over to overtime yesterday? I'm telling you, that kid is such a joy to watch for every game this season. The way he was able to throw on the run, almost sidearm the throw deep into the end zone to get the what turned out to be the game-tying score on a 4th down play. I would be really careful if I were other AFC teams once the playoffs start, because that game wound up clinching a playoff spot for the Chiefs yesterday. I'm going to tell you right now, no team is going to want to play Kansas City in the playoffs right now because they are just deadly. They're deadly at quarterback. They're deadly at receiver. They're short-handed at running back now that Kareem Hunt has been released from the Chiefs. At least they're able to use a two-headed running back to support Mahomes in not just yesterday's game, but for the rest of the season. As far as elsewhere around the NFL, what about the way the Cowboys were able to beat the Eagles in overtime? The Eagles claimed that there were a lot of questionable calls that were made by the referees. I never saw the game, so I really could not begin to tell you what happened, but I think it's safe to say that the Eagles season might be done. I mean, they're 6-7 right now, and the schedule is going to get even more difficult for them. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Eagles have to play the Rams in next week's game on a Sunday night. Speaking of the Rams, they had their heads handed to them by the Bears, who played magnificent defense against Jared Goff and Todd Gurley yesterday. In fact, Goff, if I'm not mistaken, wound up getting intercepted 4 times by the Bears defense. And that just goes to show you how much of an impact Khalil Mack has made on the other 10 guys on defense. Because now the Bears not only are over 500 for the first time in forever, they also have a chance to take the NFC North Division as their own with another 3 games to go. As far as other games yesterday, leave it to San Diego to once again prove their mettle. They took advantage of a slumping Cincinnati squad and just hammered them the rest of the way. And whereas the Chargers have been a revelation on offense, defensively, they've been really overlooked this year. This is where Joey Bosa has made such an impact for the rest of the 10 guys on the field for the Chargers. As far as other games yesterday, well, let's go through the NFL schedule, see exactly what happened in what turned out to be Week 14 of the NFL season. We mentioned the Jets and we mentioned the Giants. As far as other games in the NFL, here we are. Well, we know tonight is Vikings and Seahawks, which is a critical game for both teams' playoff hopes. And we see that the Titans wound up spanking the Jaguars this past Thursday night, thanks to a 238-yard game from Derrick Henry, which is a franchise record. Also, the Saints wound up laying claim to the NFC South Division title after they spanked the Buccaneers yesterday. So now all the Saints have to do is try and take the number 1 seed in the NFC playoff picture, and they'll be home free because they do not want to have to go on the road for any playoff games unless it's the Super Bowl. Also, we saw that the Colts were able to hold on to beat the Texans, so now the Colts are still in the playoff picture. I must ask, though, exactly what is going on with the Cleveland Browns? They went from winning 4 games in 2015 to 1 game in 2016 to being completely winless last year to now being 5-7-1 this season. The Browns have now won more games this year than in the previous 3 years combined. This just goes to show you that Baker Mayfield is really making his team believe in themselves. I mean, the numbers weren't outstanding, just 238 yards passing, but he was very efficient. He was 18 of 22. And also, more importantly, the defense did an outstanding job against Cam Newton. He did not throw for 1 single touchdown yesterday, and he also committed a turnover, throwing an interception. Dare I say that the Cleveland Browns might have a chance at maybe breaking 500 this year? They have the Broncos, the Bengals, and the Ravens coming up. If they can win all 3, if they can win their last 3 games, then the Bengals might be able to go over 500 for the first time since, 2007, which is a long time ago. But the bottom line to this is we now have a little bit more clear picture in the AFC playoff race. Right now, it's the Chiefs and the Chargers that have the 2 best records. The Chiefs, the Chargers, and Yeah, the Chiefs and the Chargers are the two best teams in the AFC right now. Then you have the Patriots. Then you have the Texans. Then after that, it's basically a hodgepodge of guys that are going for playoff spots right now. At this rate, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams that are still in the race for the AFC's either North Division and South Division titles, as well as the West Division and the East Division and the 2 wildcard spots. So every single division race and both wildcard spots are still open in the AFC. The NFC is a little bit more clear. The Saints won the South, the Rams won the West. They have identical records right now. So those two are going for the number 1 seeds in the NFC. If both teams finish with the same record, then the Saints would win that tiebreaker because they have the head-to-head against the Rams. After that, the Bears won the North. The Bears can win the North if they win their last 3 games. And the Cowboys need one more victory to win the Eastern Division title. So tonight we have Vikings and Seahawks, a crucial game for both teams in their push for a playoff spot. Now, as far as what's going on in college football, the famous Army-Navy game wound up being played over the weekend, and it was the Army that came away with a crucial victory over the Naval Academy, which means now they have won the Commander-in-Chief trophy. So now the Army can practically cruise their way into the bowl season. For the record, Army had a terrific record this year. They were 10-2, and they're going to be going into bowl season. I think they're going to be playing in the Armed Forces Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. So we already have the bowl games all set up. First off, there's a quintet of games taking place on the 15th. That's going to open bowl season. And, of course, there is the more famous bowl games that are going on. The Rose Bowl has Ohio State and Washington. The Fiesta Bowl is going to have Central Florida playing in the game. There's also the college football playoffs themselves. Alabama is going to play Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl, and Clemson is going to face Notre Dame, I think, in the Cotton Bowl or the Sugar Bowl. I'm not really sure, but the playoffs have already been set up, and the national championship game is going to be played on January 7th, if I'm not mistaken. Now, as far as what's going on in basketball, just a couple nights ago, the Nets wound up winning the Battle of the Boroughs against the Knicks. Not that there's much to brag about. I mean, the only thing that came out of that game is the fact that the Nets wound up snapping out of the doldrums a little bit. They now have 10 wins against 18 losses this season, while the Knicks are still a complete and unmitigated disaster right now. And just recently, I wound up reading this article about which teams might be regretting their first overall draft picks or second overall draft picks. And in that article, it said that the one team that might be getting cold feet regarding their number 1 draft pick could be Trae Young. Granted, Trae Young is just a rookie. He's only had maybe 20 to 30 games so far. So I think we should hold off on what the kid has been able to do or not do. One thing about him, though, he's ballsy. He will take the big shot when he wants to. The other problem is he's a major turnover waiting to happen. The other team that might be regretting their pick is DeAndre Ayton by the Phoenix Suns. Luka Doncic, who everyone has been touting, was there at numbers 1 through 4. And what happens? The Suns get DeAndre Ayton, all because he's a University of Arizona product. Well, let me tell you, DeAndre Ayton has some really good skill sets going for him. He's a real beast offensively. He's dangerous around the rim. He's quick when it comes to cutting to the basket. He's not a great post-up guy, but he has a good outside touch. And he's really good with his hook shot. He's shooting 60% almost on hook shots. Now, the other problem with him is he cannot defend in the half court. And there have been moments when he's been really posterized by opponents. The other team that might be regretting making their first-round pick is Marvin Bagley III by the Sacramento Kings. Bagley is about as good as they come. Let's put it that way. I mean, he's played well at the start of the season. But there's the issue of Luka Doncic, a guy who's brought everything to the Mavericks and has even put them over 500 this season. The Mavericks have a 13-11 record, which, when you think about it, is outstanding compared to the previous 2 or 3 years of misery that the Mavericks put their fans through, so much that there have been empty seats at Mavericks games. And even in our neck of the woods, the critics are saying that maybe Kevin Knox might not have been such a great overall pick for the Knicks after all. But when you think about it, can we really depend on the Knicks to try and do anything correctly? I mean, last year they passed on Dennis Smith Jr. because of the concerns they had about his surgically repaired knee and chose Frank Ntilikina. Dennis Smith Jr. is an explosive athlete. He can make threes. He's deadly on the off the dribble. He has explosive leaping ability for a kid who's about 6'3". And what does Frank Ntilikina bring? He brings nothing offensively. All he can do is the only way for him to get by is with his defense, which has been solid. But at the same time, you need a guy of his height and his ilk, a 7-foot-tall wingspan, to try and create offensively, and he has not done that at all. And because of that, Frank Ntilikina was not getting any playing time for 3 straight games. As far as Kevin Knox is concerned, a lot of people have basically been saying that he's still trying to figure his way through the NBA. Well, let me tell you, he's already missed 2 to 4 weeks because of injuries. Not only that, but he's been running rather hot and cold lately. I mean, he could go from having a 20 to 25-point game in one moment and then get maybe 8 points the next game. This was where maybe they could have used Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as their 9th overall pick, because he brings so much more to the table than Kevin Knox does. But, again, let's see exactly what can happen when it comes to the rest of the season. Now, as far as the Nets are concerned, they have lost so many close games right now that you figure that they could probably be either a 500 team right now or a game over 500. But I know it's a learning process, but teams have got to start learning on the fly how to win the close games, because that's when you really know how to push your metal. And also, it creates confidence. It creates a swagger. You can't have these young kids losing so many close games because it's really going to eat at them. You can't have them losing so many games because it's eating at them. So let's see exactly what the Nets can do for an encore. As far as what's going to happen elsewhere in the league, well, I see the Nets are going to have their next game. This Wednesday against the Sixers is the Nets' next game. As far as the Knicks are concerned, they will have their next game. Well, this coming Wednesday as well. They're going to be playing the Cavaliers. The Knicks the Knicks played last night against the Charlotte Hornets, and lo and behold, the Knicks lost again, 119-107. I'm telling you, this franchise is such a freaking laughingstock that it defies logic how a team like this can be just so outplayed and so outclassed so badly by a team that looks so mediocre and is having so much trouble trying to find an identity right now. For the record, the Hornets are a 500 club. They're 13-13 right now. Now, turns out the Nets and the Knicks are practically home free compared to some of the other teams around the league. Has anyone heard about what's happened with the Chicago Bulls? They fired their head coach, Fred Hoiberg, and bring in Jim Boylan. Things have gotten so bad with the Bulls right now, ever since the coaching change, that now players are practically texting votes to see whether they should even show up to practice or not, which is the first bad sign. The second bad sign is the new coach, Jim Boylan, has been running his players through the ground during practices. And also, during a recent game, things got so bad that he replaced the entire starting five with the bench at one game, and it really embarrassed the players to no end. So now I'm starting to wonder exactly what can happen next with these Chicago Bulls. You think the Bulls fans are longing for the days of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen? I would say so. Well, it's going to have to take some really shrewd drafting and some really shrewd free agent signings for the Bulls to try and get to where they are right now. But first and foremost, they have no players to try and speak of right now. I mean, granted, they do have Wendell Carter III, who's a pretty decent draft pick. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they also have Lauri Markkanen on their roster as well. Yep, they also have Lauri Markkanen. They also have Denzel Valentine, who's a decent guard. Plus, there's Ryan Arcidiacono, who was one of the heroes of Villanova's national title team. There's also Chris Dunn. There's also Shaquille Harrison. Other than that, they've got very, very, very little to try and work with right now. As far as what's going on around the league, we know that Golden State, of course, has the top seed. And this is assuming that you want to go by conference right now instead of by division. Golden State, of course, has the top seed out west with 18 wins. Then there's Oklahoma City, which has played so much better this year. And I think it's no coincidence that ever since they made the Carmelo Anthony trade, where they got Dennis Schroeder in return, the Oklahoma City Thunder have been a much better team. In fact, that entire Western Conference is loaded right now. Golden State, Oklahoma City, Denver, the Los Angeles Clippers. Yep, the Los Angeles Clippers. The rebuilt Los Angeles Clippers have 16 wins this year and are 2 games behind in the win column to the Warriors. Then there's the Lakers, who after that disastrous start have really righted themselves. They've now won 7 of their last 10 games. Then there's Memphis. Then there's Portland. Dallas has gotten so much better. Luka Doncic has made a real difference with them. And then there's Minnesota and New Orleans, both of whom are 500 clubs. San Antonio and Utah are 2 teams that are under 500. San Antonio's got it really bad right now. I mean, ever since the retirements of Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili, and also Tony Parker signing with the Hornets, they just have not been the same team. So now it's LaMarcus Aldridge who's had to be the go-to guy for them. I mean, plus DeMar DeRozan has played reasonably well for the Spurs ever since he got traded by the Raptors. But other than that, they have not been able to get not much play from their point guard position. And also, aside from LaMarcus Aldridge, they've gotten very middle from the middle. Now, looking at the Eastern Conference, Toronto. Who saw the Toronto Raptors make a charge for the top spot ever since they wound up making the trade with the Spurs to get Kawhi Leonard? Well, now Toronto has 21 wins this season. In fact, this Eastern Conference is an entire hodgepodge of teams that you never expected to challenge for the top spot. The Raptors, Bucks, Sixers, Pacers, the Celtics, the Pistons, the Hornets, and the Orlando Magic right now would be the teams that would make the playoffs. After that, it's Miami and Washington that are separated by a game. Brooklyn, let's face facts. Brooklyn is not a playoff team. But at least they have not shown the tendency of giving up in every single game. They have shown that they can really, really stay in games for the majority of the year. I mean, when you think about it, probably their most lopsided loss this season has been 20 points to the Pacers. And then there was a 19-point loss to the Knicks. And then after that, 16-point loss to the Warriors, 13-point loss to the Heat. They've really stayed in a lot of their games this season. So when you think about it, maybe they should be right at 500 if they had just executed a little bit more down the stretch. Now, as far as what's going on in the wonderful world of hockey, well, the Rangers unfortunately suffered a really, really disappointing loss over the weekend where they lost to the Florida Panthers. So as a result, the Rangers are now 14-12-3 this season. As we speak, the Rangers are playing the Tampa Bay Lightning. So let's see if the Rangers can come up with a big win in West Central Florida to try and right the ship, so to speak. As for the Islanders, they had a big come-from-behind victory at Detroit over the weekend. And they're playing tonight, as we speak, against the Pittsburgh Penguins, a Penguin squad that, if you add their overtime losses to their regulation losses, they'd be an under 500 squad right now. As for the Jersey Devils, that's a team that really has fallen by the wayside. They lost a shootout to the Anaheim Ducks over the weekend. Tonight, their West Coast road trip continues with a game in San Jose. And then they're going to have 3 days off before they return home to play the Vegas Golden Knights on Friday night. As far as what's going on in other circles of sports, I've been watching these ESPN 30 for 30 stories recently, and I wound up seeing this really fascinating story about the former Indiana head coach, Bobby Knight. It was called The Last Days of Knight, which wound up rerunning just recently. They really painted a picture of a guy who is a brilliant defensive tactician, but a guy who, when things go wrong in a game, or if he sees things go wrong in a game, you better watch out because he is going to lower the boom on you. Well, the subject of that 30 for 30 story was the infamous videotape in which he was seen grabbing the throat of one of his players, which turned out to be I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure if it was Pat Knight or if it was somebody else. I'm going to see if I can research this here. But that video turned out to be the turning point to his downfall. And as it turns out, he wound up extending his career another 6 or 7 seasons by coaching at Texas Tech, whom he would lead to a couple of NCAA tournaments in a row. Let's see. I'm going to try and find the exact source. It was Neil Reed. It was Neil Reed who was the subject of that famous video, or infamous video, of him being choked by Coach Knight. As it turns out, the person who wound up secretly leaking that video to the university remains unknown to this day. But I can tell you this: whoever leaked that video probably saved not just that program, but that university from more damage than Bob Knight could have inflicted on him. And as it turns out, not only did he have his followers, he had thousands upon thousands of followers, but this divided the entire state of Indiana like you could not even believe. He had his followers, yet at the same time, no one could ever try and fathom the boorish behavior that Knight inflicted upon his players. And it wasn't just the choking incident either. It was bringing a piece of toilet paper with some manure on it from the bathroom and telling his players, "This is what you're playing like." Supposedly, he also left an empty pizza box that had manure on it on the middle of the court during practices to try and make his players a little bit more cognizant of their surroundings. There was also the famous chair throwing incident in the Purdue game that took place 33 years ago. Divorcing one of his wives and having that same wife rip him to the media. Of course, with all of the bad and all of the controversy that he brought upon himself into the university, one can never take away from him the 3 national titles that he won for the university in 1976, 81, and 87. And he was a revered figure in Bloomington because of his winning ways. Now, as far as his afterlife or the aftermath of his time as a head coach, it took him a year before he was finally able to get a new job at Texas Tech, a program that did not even consider basketball even as part of their program. But ever since he wound up landing on the Lubbock campus, he turned that program around immediately. He took them to, I think, 3 or 4 NCAA tournaments and a couple of NITs before he wound up resigning for good at the near the end of the 2008 season. He's now 78 years old. He did a lot of broadcasting for ESPN in the past. But to this day, he is still a very polarizing figure around college basketball circles. Now, speaking of college basketball, over the weekend, there was this brilliant and fascinating game that took place at the Garden between Seton Hall and Kentucky. The two programs wound up going at it back and forth in a really, really terrific showing of strategy between John Calipari and the Seton Hall coach in this game. And to Seton Hall's credit, the deficit, I don't remember the deficit ever reaching double digits in that game. So, Seton Hall did a tremendous job of keeping the game within striking distance, and they even took the lead deep into the game. But then Kentucky wound up getting a prayer, a half-court shot to go in just before the regulation buzzer, and they wound up going into overtime. And then in the end, Seton Hall got this brilliant three-point shot near the end of overtime with 9 seconds left in overtime to win the game. And as it turns out, it was Keldon Johnson that wound up making that play. Easily one of the best games of the season. And as a result, Seton Hall wound up raising their record to 6-3. This, by far, is the single greatest win, the greatest regular season win in that program's history. Their greatest NCAA tournament win will always be against Duke in the Final Four almost 30 years ago. So now we're going to see if this game can really catapult Seton Hall to that next level for the rest of the season. They have the Garden State Classic coming up with Rutgers, so let's see exactly what goes on there. And also, Syracuse wound up coming from double digits behind at halftime to beat Georgetown, their old Big East Conference rival. And also, just yesterday, St. John's, my beloved St. John's, won their 9th straight game to start the season, thanks to another brilliant game from Shamori Pons. Whether he decides to declare for the draft after his junior year or not, Shamori Pons is going to go down as one of the best players that the program has ever had. I mean, he really grabbed the game by the throat in that second half and just catapulted them to a victory. Now, let's see what other stuff is going on in the world of sports right now. It's pretty much the same old from what happened over the weekend. Checking out, going back to football, checking out what happened in the NFL. The Raiders wound up firing their general manager, Reggie McKenzie, who was on the job for 7 years. Other than that, it's pretty much the exact same thing. Now, what's going on in other circles of sports? Well, we'd be remiss if we did not mention that the country lost one of their great men when President George H.W. Bush passed away at the beginning of the month. What people may not know about him was he was a really decent athlete back in the day. In fact, he played baseball for Yale University and was even a cheerleader for the football team. So that's your sports tidbit concerning George H.W. Bush right now. Of course, his son George II was a longtime owner with the Texas Rangers before he went into the presidency. And of course, other guys, other past presidents wound up shining the light in their area of sports as well. Many people don't know this, but Gerald R. Ford was a brilliant football player in high school and at the University of Michigan. In fact, he was an All-American at Michigan, and if I'm not mistaken, he took them to back-to-back undefeated seasons in 1933 and 1934. And get this, rather than accept a tryout with his hometown Detroit Lions, he decided to go to Yale Law School because he had much more important ambitions that he wanted to focus on than anything else. Now, we have about roughly 7.5 minutes left. Wanted to let everybody know that we're thinking about taking the show in a different direction, so to speak. In years past, you've seen us do a lot of yapping in the studios, and also you've seen us do some really interesting stories out in the field. So we're going to see if we can bring you some more feature stories down the road in which we take in the bleachers out onto the field to try and give you some more up close and personal stuff about what's happening here on Staten Island, as well as in the sports world in general. So that's just a little bit of what to watch for as we approach the new year. And in case you heard that beeping noise right now, apparently they're testing out the fire drill alarms to see if they're working, and apparently they are. So don't be, for lack of a better word, don't be alarmed by that sound. It's just a test, just like the emergency broadcast system. Now, as far as what's going on elsewhere in the world of sports, as wrestling fans know, WWE is going to be bringing SmackDown to the Fox network next year, which I think is a brilliant idea. Just recently, I saw a story on a website called TotalProSports.com that SmackDown has now become the unofficial #1 brand for WWE, and that Raw has fallen to a distant second place. And the reason for that is because SmackDown has had better athletes, better superstars, better storylines to work with, whereas Raw has become peppered with really good wrestlers who have not been given the best storylines to work with. So, draw your own conclusions to this, but once SmackDown makes its way back to national television, network television next season, I'm going to see for myself exactly what they're going to be looking for, or what there is to look for. It's now at that point where the NFL is down to basically seeding for the playoffs and also positioning for playoffs, and also who could make their way in and who is going to get left out in the dust. Right now, as far as who the single best team in the league is, you could say either New Orleans, the Los Angeles Rams, or Kansas City right now. And it's not just a record either. They've all got great things going on for them at quarterback. And except for Kansas City now, the running game has become absolutely dangerous. And even defensively, I think they've gotten a real head start on the rest of the pack. Although, if you ask me, I would say maybe Kansas City is a little bit more vulnerable defensively than the other two teams are. Otherwise, we really cannot get what's going on with the entire NFL playoff fold right now. All we know is that New Orleans and the Los Angeles Rams, and Kansas City are all in. So let's see exactly how this is going to shape up by the time the year ends. And for the record, the season's going to end on December 30th. So let's see exactly what happens. So with about 3 minutes left, I want to give a special word of thanks to Kenny Graham, who's been going back and forth between the other side of the glass and working on a project right now. I also want to say thanks to all of the people watching at home for really checking us out. And we certainly hope that you will check us out for the next couple of weeks. And just as I speak, Kenny just snuck back into the seat on the other side of the glass. Now, as far as what to watch for the rest of this week, the Jets are going to be playing the Houston Texans at home on a Saturday. In fact, it's going to be part of a double header that's going to be taking place on Saturday. It's the Jets and the Texans. Then after that, if I'm not mistaken, let me see what we have here. Here we are. It's Browns and Broncos in a very interesting Saturday primetime game. Two teams that are practically trying to sneak into the playoffs. This is going to be a very interesting game to watch. Now, as far as the Giants are concerned, the Giants have the Tennessee Titans next Sunday. The Titans are trying to position themselves for the playoffs. As for the Giants, they just want to get back to 500 so they can break even for the season. So with that said, I think I'm just going to bid you guys adieu right now. So once again, thanks to Kenny on the other side of the glass. Thanks to you guys for watching at home. And hopefully Hector can join us next week 100% healthy. That way he could join us in the studio. So for everyone here, I'm Jaime. We hope to see you next week. Good night, everyone.